Hi there, I'm Mabel Chan, and this is One in a Billion. In our fall series, This Asian American Life, Searching.
When was the last time you saw her?
She did not run away.
Local team has been missing since last Thursday.
She made a transaction of $2,500. I know my daughter.
Where were you the night my daughter went missing?
I know my daughter.
Look into her behavior also.
She gets a fake ID.
I know my daughter. This is her keychain.
She was my best friend. You broke his jaw.
I know my daughter.
I'm trying to help you find my daughter.
Well, so much of the film really focuses in on John Cho's character's emotions. As a father, he expresses a range of, different feelings from anger to fear, and you see him get very sad and vulnerable too. And it was so exciting seeing an Asian American figure express all of this.
That's Mimi Wong, a Chinese-American writer, editor in New York. After watching this movie, Searching, she wrote a moving piece for the Catapult about what's missing in her own relationship with her father, was prevailing in the mass media portrayal of Asian men, Asian fatherhood, and masculinity. Here's my conversation with Mimi. The first question I want to ask you, Mimi, is what struck you about this movie, Searching, that sparked this piece? How watching Asian fathers on screen helped me face my own.
Searching is about a father who's looking for his daughter, his teenage daughter who's gone missing. And so what he does is he starts going through her social media, her computer, and it really becomes this journey to figure out what was going on in her life and reconnect with his daughter. And so watching this man go through this emotional journey was very moving.
The first time you saw this movie, did you already feel something personal in it, about it?
Well, there was a very immediate connection in that the film is set in Silicon Valley in California. So I already knew the setting, and these characters felt very familiar to me because that's where I grew up, in California. So I very much related to the characters, without even thinking about my own backstory.
Now, there's something very striking that sort of goes against what you considered as a stereotypical portrayal of Asian father. You call it radical at some point in your article.
Well, so much of the film really focuses in on John Cho's character's emotions. As a father, he expresses a range of, different feelings from anger to fear, and you see him get very sad and vulnerable too. And it was so exciting seeing an Asian American figure express all this. It was helpful seeing an example, a positive example, I thought, of an Asian American man who, throughout the course of the story, was learning to get in touch with his emotions, who was realizing maybe some of his past mistakes, and those mistakes had very serious consequences in this film. His daughter goes missing, and he doesn't know why. He has no idea, because he comes to realize he hasn't really been involved in her life.
No communication, no email, no text, no phone.
The thing is, they were in touch, and I think in many ways he represents a modern father in that he was constantly texting with his daughter. He seemed on the surface to have tabs on what was going on in her life, but part of the underlying story is that his wife, her mother, had passed away, and I think without that mother providing an emotional link between father and daughter, there was something missing. And a little bit later in the movie, it becomes clear that in his grieving process, he had maybe shut himself off from his daughter to protect her, to not reveal how devastated he was. And in doing so, they had lost touch.
Do you see parallels in any of that in your own life? Have you ever gone missing?
So not in that sense, but I do think it parallels maybe our own coming of age. I think there is something very specific about John Cho's character's daughter, who is a teenager at the time that she goes missing. And, that's the time when many of us are creating our own lives, trying to become adults. And I think that's a point where many of us start feeling like we're departing from our parents, perhaps, that parents and their children are no longer on the same page.
And in particular, the coming of age, trying to grow your own wings and go in direction that your father may not need to know or may not want to know until something goes wrong.
Yeah, so one example that I brought up in my essay was dating. I think that can be a very fraught topic for a lot of Asian Americans, and especially if they know their parents have specific expectations about the type of person they're supposed to date and then eventually marry. And so I think the way, at least I feel like my peers and I have dealt with it, is we don't necessarily tell our parents, especially not when we're casually dating. So I think that becomes a place where we're already creating distance. I also think for many Asian Americans, we feel like for a long time we've just been fighting for any kind of representation in film and television. And so now we've arrived at this place where we're starting to see a lot more different iterations, different kinds of stories being told. And so I'm really interested in looking at not just positive portrayals of Asian Americans or just being excited that there are Asian Americans on screen, but really asking what is being reflected, what in our own culture are we seeing on screen.
What do we share in common as human first before we look at the circumstances and the conditions under which we grew up that certainly can be so different, right? That really segues well into the next topic about generally the media portrayal. This is from our team asking, do you think media should portray more of the typical Asian American fathers and how their children manage that relationship to help the audience face their own, or explore other less told stories about the Asian American fathers that don't fall under this popular image, to encourage Asian American fathers or Asian fathers to rethink their parenting style?
I would really love to see more authentic stories. I would love to see creators, filmmakers, storytellers be able to tell their own stories or some version of it that they want to put out there. I think that's where we start. It's not about positive or negative portrayals, but really wanting to just see ourselves on screen. Growing up in California, where I did grow up with a lot of other Asian American peers in a fairly white town. So in that sense, from a very early age, I was very conscious of my own identity. But I was also very conscious of trying to figure out what being Asian American meant for me, because I could see my peers, I could see how I was similar, but I could also see how I felt really different from a lot of them. And so I spent most of my adolescence trying to navigate the world in this way.
Did you ever feel fear that you couldn't navigate on your own, that you need your parents' approval?
Oh, I mean, I always felt like I needed parental approval, more so when it came to performing well in school and, applying to colleges. It mattered to me what they thought. I knew that dating wasn't really an option or something that I could prioritize until I got to college. There was just so much emphasis.
And that's your own idea?
That's for me. Yeah, that was just the way I read my parents' expectations, whether it's true or not. As Asian Americans, we all have very different singular stories. Nobody perfectly fits a stereotype. At the same time, within our own community, we are very familiar with cultural expectation and what is expected generally of us, especially as model minority figures. We're all trying to live up to different expectations, not just our parents, but also the pressure to be good citizens, good Americans, good students, whatever. Being a minority in this country, you feel that pressure even more.
And that is actually an interesting segue to a larger question, which is, again, from our team, about how would you pinpoint the difference in Asian and American parenting style that would make for better relationship between parents and children?
Well, something I pointed out in my essay is this issue of toxic masculinity, of men feeling like they can't express their emotion. That is something that runs across all different races and cultures. But what I found interesting in terms of within the Asian American culture was how we try to tell our own narrative or explanation for why this may be.
What is that?
So from my own personal understanding, again, just gleaming from my mother, her relationship with her father, I think he was a very traditional Chinese man, subscribed to Confucianism. It's understood that her role as the older daughter was to clean and cook for her parents and her older brothers, and very conservative
gender roles, right? Well, I grew up in Hong Kong too, like your mom, and in that generation, I totally get that. So that still is alive, right? That attitude is still alive in your father's generation, or even current Asian father in their 20s and 30s, you think?
I definitely saw it growing up. Not myself personally, but going over to classmates' houses, friends' houses, I saw that kind of fatherhood was very much present.
Right. Let's dive back to this masculinity issue. What are some of the examples that are just really affecting children negatively to have this sort of toxic masculinity playing out?
One that I've heard before is fathers who didn't tell their children that they loved them. And that's often, I think, ascribed to, again, a cultural difference. Whereas we place a lot of value, I think, in America with being affectionate.
You made a point about we change our narrative about sacrifice and suffering, that as children, you, in this case, have every right to feel pain and be able to share that as well and not shove it down just because you haven't sacrificed the way they have. Is that right?
I think there's also something in Chinese culture that the instinct is to not air one's dirty laundry. It's always about saving face. And so I think for a long time I didn't really feel comfortable talking about my parents were separated and that I came from a broken family. And it wasn't necessarily that I was embarrassed, but I just didn't have the language for how to talk about these things. And it didn't feel normal to talk about them with my friends.
What changed that you were able to talk about it?
I think really just growing up and meeting other people with different life experiences, and now also as I'm talking to other Asian American friends, realizing we all come from, different types of families, and we all have our secrets and family drama.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, let me just ask another question, just about the article, How Watching Asian Fathers on Screen Help Me Face My Own. You start and finish with your personal story with your father, beginning with a phone call and ending with a bit of despair or resignation. Am I right?
So on my train ride up here, I realized today is actually my father's birthday.
Whoa!
And I didn't even remember. And that's kind of how the essay begins. I call my father on his birthday, or what I thought was his birthday, and I ended up calling him a day late. And we had sort of a tense, curt conversation, and that was it. And that really, I think, set me off in thinking about what is this relationship that I have with my dad, where we talk maybe once or twice a year.
Oh, wow.
We're not very close, and we've drifted apart over the years, and I think it's something that I continue to think about a lot, and I'm not always sure how to address. And so I think writing the essay was a little bit about digging into that pain.
I wanted to say that our team actually has come up with some questions for you because they saw their dads in the movie and in the article. There is one question, which is, how much do you think that your father, the way he parented you, shaped you the way you are?
This is something I wonder a lot for myself. I'm very close with my mother, so I can definitely see her imprint on me much more clearly. But in little ways, I think I see myself picking up some of the lessons I learned from my dad. He really prides himself on being a savvy businessman. From a very early age, he taught me the importance of saving and being, wise with money. And so I think in my own way, that's something that has always stuck in the back of my brain. And that's how I approach, my own personal finances.
Actually, this question zeroes in on your relationship with your father. How does that shape who you are? It has an emotional component, doesn't it?
A big milestone for me in my own life was my parents' separation. That happened when I was 12. That's an interesting time for something like that to happen in your life.
You were 12.
I was still, forming my own sense of self, and I don't think I really took the time to even reflect on what was happening until I had moved away from home.
For college.
I was trying to put a brave face on for both of my parents' sake, and it would manifest in ways where I was fighting a lot with my mom, and I was very angry at her, but I couldn't articulate why. And it was really only until college and adulthood that I saw the impact of living through my parents' breakup.
Right. And you were first dealing with it by not speaking up about it or acknowledging it. Sort of, is that how it first hit you and then later on?
I think I thought I was trying to be very mature. I also grew up as an only child, so I was used to dealing with my parents as almost equals. Mm-hmm. And so I thought I was mature enough to handle what was happening. But of course, looking back, I can see the ways in which I was very hurt, very confused, and had internalized some of what was happening.
And those feelings have a way and a timing of its own to come up and knock on your door of your heart.
I think one positive consequence, though, is that I knew from an early age that it was up to me to kind of decide for myself what kind of life I wanted, what kind of relationships I wanted. I saw that my parents did not have it easy. They messed up. And so in some ways it was more freeing for me to know that I no longer had to live up to some of their expectations.
You're able to claim your own independence and live your own life.
Yes, exactly.
Here's another question from our team for you. For Asian American children to better connect with their fathers, would you recommend they start sharing emotional stories and thoughts? Or to maintain the current relationship, which is often full of distance and respect?
I have to say, I really respect the friends and classmates I've known over the years who have said or told me, particularly in response to reading my essay, that they have started a dialogue with their parents, with their fathers. I wish I was brave enough to do that. I don't know that I'm quite there
yet. Right.
I also know that this is a very individual journey for so many people. And some people are just not ready yet, depending on the relationship with their parents, if it's more strained or there are even larger cultural issues at play, they may not yet feel comfortable to do that. That's a very large question.
It's so large, isn't it?
I think this returns to the issue of masculinity and toxic masculinity. In general, I think that we are still in a time where men are learning to get in touch with their emotions, especially older generations of men. And so I think that is slowly changing. I think the younger generations may look back and not even see this as an issue.
What should different types of Asian father do to better bridge the emotional gap?
Part of the answer might lie in thinking about the ways in which generational trauma is perpetuated. Growing up, I remember hearing my mom telling me her relationship with her parents, also strained, distant, maybe even more formal than I could understand. And, that for her was very typical of the culture that she grew up in. And she grew up in Hong Kong. And my grandparents were from China. So I think she made a very conscious decision when she became a parent to not replicate that kind of parenting.
Wonderful.
I think it helped that my mother also studied early childhood education, and so she took a lot of that in when it came to her relationship with me. We have a pretty open, affectionate relationship. So that's something I would want to think about when it comes time, if I were to become a parent, to think about the ways in which I am conscious of how I'm approaching my relationship with them and making sure that I'm not reproducing, something that came before.
Nice. Well, you hit on a great point about the past that's still living in you, and there's a way that a parent subconsciously or unconsciously pass it on, right? What would be one thing that you can tell your father today if he were listening that might change whatever you feel today into something positive and hopeful?
I guess I would say that I am open to having a better relationship with him, but it can't be a one-way street. I felt like for a while I was the one who would be calling my dad and remembering Father's Day, trying to remember his birthday, calling him on holidays, but not hearing from him if I wasn't the one to take that step. And so I would probably say to him, I wish that it were a two-way street.
A few months after my interview with Mimi, her father surprised her one day with a phone call.
Out of the blue. And I was really surprised to, see his name pop up on my phone. And, I was kind of cautious about, what he was going to say or why he called.
Her father would call a few more times because he knew his time was running out. He died last month of late-stage colon cancer. In our next interview, Mimi talked about her memory of those conversations and how they made her look at her father and their relationship differently. That's in 2 weeks, October 22nd. 1 in a Billion is
Brian Latwinowicz,
Yvette, you, Maggie, she.
And our lovely theme song is composed by Brad McCarthy. Let us know if you want to join our team of volunteers, help us plan events, pitch a story. Just go to our website, oneinaBillionVoices.org, and find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Support for our podcast comes from our collaboration with the Victor and William Funk Foundation.